Well, Hans, last week on our show, we talked about Hunter Biden and the disclosures that came out of the DOJ relating to the fact that Hunter was, in fact, acting as a foreign agent and had never registered. But of course, they also said they weren't going to charge him for that. And it was something we were kind of trying to make a big deal of at the time, and it wasn't getting a lot of traction. Of course, it was Hunter Biden and not, Kamala, where all the focus is. But this week, it has gotten a little bit more attention. And there was a New York Times article, although attention's a bad word, distraction is maybe a better word for it. But the New York Times, good old Ken Vogel, came out with an article. Hunter Biden sought State Department help for Ukrainian company, and magically puts the focus over on Italy. So, it's kind of back in the news now. Maybe we kind of wanted to address it. So what do you make of all this?
The timing is fascinating, isn't it? So Biden is deposed, no other word for it. And all of a sudden, David Wise feels comfortable saying what we all knew, but doing it in an official Department of Justice court filing, which is what we talked about on last week's show. The fact that Hunter was, in fact, peddling influence, selling influence to the U.S. government. That's what we talked about last week. We don't need to rehash all that. Now, we did say that the focus of Wise's filing was on Romania, even though he did also say that it also concerned Ukraine and China. But he basically said, well, we don't have to talk about that. Anyway, you can watch our show from last week if you want to know the details on that. So now we have the media jumping in particular the New York Times, and as soon as they jumped in, everyone else jumped in. But you're right. It's not, yes, on the one hand, they are now talking about Biden corruption. So apparently that's now allowable within the corporate media. But you're absolutely right. They're still trying to distract from the main thing here, which is so frustrating. Here, let me just put it up here. So the New York Times story was accompanied by an AP tweet, and here's what it says. Hunter Biden reportedly sought U.S. government help for Ukrainian gas company Burisma. Check the date, August 14th, 2024. Now, the funny thing is, if you click on it and if you read it, they're talking about Italy. We'll get into the weeds of that here in a moment. But what they're not talking about is the elephant in the room. And apparently no one's talking about that yet. Obviously, he's sought U.S. government help from his father. This is the whole thing. We've been talking about this for, 5-6 years. It was 2018 when Joe Biden went up on and gave his blowhard thing about how he got the prosecutor fired. We've known all this.
Yeah, that's one of the things. That was a point that we were trying to make last week. And and by the way, we've got a more detailed article on the whole DOJ indictment of Hunter Biden, the coming tax trial, and how that played out with the FARA charges. We got that up on our Truth Over News Substack. But, that's something that keeps getting lost in all this, because in terms of the DOJ, they raised Romania, which I'm not surprised they raised Romania because it was kind of removed from the major, people don't know much about that advent, and we do cover that. But one of the problems with raising Romania and now raising this is, like you said, these are all actions that happened while Joe Biden was vice president. So all the payments that were made to Hunter Biden's firm, with the exception of one payment, 17 payments, 16 of them were made to Hunter and the Biden family. Haley Biden got a payment as well while Joe Biden was vice president. So I don't know what you make. We talked a little bit about this before, but I kind of see this as sort of twofold. One, I feel like, okay, yeah, Biden's out of the way and they can sort of say what they want to say. But there's also maybe this aspect of a little bit of a warning, I think, that's being issued. As far as the New York Times, it's interesting the way that they try to distract. I guess what's notable is everything that's come out has always served to distract. The DOJ filing, which admits that Hunter was a foreign agent and we're not going to charge him, even though that's the much more serious crime, focused on Romania. New York Times comes out with their article. They kind of allude to Burisma, but they don't touch on Biden's time as vice president. And instead, they kind of point the finger over to Italy. Another situation, just like Romania, that most people don't know anything about. It's a way to sort of get it out there, but diffuse it to where people don't know much about the actual details, and it's kind of noted and everybody sort of moves on.
It's perfect, isn't it? So they kind of killed two birds with one stone here.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, they're able to get the story out and kind of wash their own hands. You know, we had nothing to do with it, with covering any of this up, and by choosing topics like Romania
And Italy.
that no one knows about, or Italy, as you say. And again, we'll get into the details here in a moment, because these topics were known and were discussed by you and I many years ago and over the years. But anyway, we'll get back to that in a moment. So on the one hand, they get to wash their hands because, oh, something happened in Romania. No one knew about that. And well, we're the New York Times. We're so great. And, you know, we're going to tell you about it. So to make it look as if they have not covered it up for the past 5, 6, 7 years, which is exactly what they did. But on the other hand, they also get this other thing done here, which is, as you say, a sort of a shot across the bow of Biden, like, hey, is just a little tidbit. Now we're able to talk about it. You know, just beware. And of course, they need Biden to just play nice, especially, I guess, Dr. Jill, who's probably very pissed that she's going to lose all her privileges here in a few months. You know, the magazine covers and the traveling all over the world and so on, that's all going to be gone. And she's going to be out at the beach house for the rest of her life. So they want to stop the Bidens from lashing out for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the timing is beyond coincidental, right? As there's reports that Biden is sort of waking up from his slumber and that he's angry about the fact that the coup was effectuated on him and maybe he wants to try to retaliate, do something about it. That's exactly the time that the DOJ makes their filing and that this story comes out. And, you know, we can't get past this whole pretense. You mentioned it a moment ago, but this pretense that, oh, it's suddenly news now. And, you know, we're getting this story out. And it's frustrating because I'm even seeing some quasi-conservative sites kind of reacting like this is news. And of course, none of this is news. It's news that it's being made news and examining why that they're doing it. And it's definitely news that the DOJ is now admitting that the very crimes that they refused to charge, not only refused to charge Hunter, but ran out the statute of limitations. Now they're admitting that he's actually guilty of them, but they're not going to charge him for it. Those things are beyond infuriating. But yes, it is, you know, it's absolutely worth noting that that's what they're doing here is they're bringing it up when it has absolutely no relevance and pretending like it was suddenly something new and to be discovered, as opposed to something that conservatives was screaming about for, you know, the last however many years.
Well, to be fair, both those issues are kind of in the weeds, and the information was out there for sure. And you and I talked about it, and there's a trail of that. We can point to that trail. You wrote about Romania years ago, and what went on over there. But I you mentioned earlier some conservative outlets have fallen for this trap for whatever reason, and they're like, oh, look, now it's Italy. That's the new one this week. And they're pretending as if this is new. Well, it's not new. We wrote about this many years ago. So after the Hunter Biden laptop came out, we both saw those emails. We saw the evidence and specifically what it was. And I'll get back to the before the Hunter Biden laptop as well. But let's just talk about the after, October of 2020. You and I immediately saw that there was direct influence peddling going on with the U.S. ambassador in Italy, a guy called John Phillips. So what happened was that Hunter and his buddies that were helping out Burisma were discussing on email whether they can get this guy Phillips to help them out. And it sounded like that was, something that was totally normal to them, and that Phillips would be totally on board. And then when we looked into this guy, Phillips, Ambassador Phillips, we saw that he's actually an old buddy of the Biden family. So what a surprise, right? But in fact, we talked about this Phillips guy before the Hunter laptop because we didn't have the emails. So we did have the emails in October of 2020, but before that, we did not have them. But there were little hints within the sort of the whole Burisma world of corruption, that there was some influence peddling in Italy. And we don't need to get into the details of that, but Burisma wanted to buy, I think it was a geothermal facility down in Italy, and they needed someone to help out and so on. So this guy's been on our radar screens for a long time. So just the fact that the New York Times comes out with it this week as a big new thing, doesn't mean it's so.
Well, the other thing, it illustrates the way that the Bidens operate. This idea of reaching out, and the fact you said it. You said something to the effect of, they just assumed this is the way, they didn't think anything of it. This is the way they do business. Well, that's the entire point. This is the way the Bidens do business. Joe Biden sets up some sort of foreign policy, and sometimes it's just as simple as him being vice president in the case of Italy. The Hunter Biden follows Joe wherever he goes, starts doing business, and then they just leverage their contacts. We talked about Romania last week. What did they do with Romania? They used the former ambassador to Romania, Mark Ittenstein, a guy who's a longtime Biden family confidant, to interface with the current ambassador to Romania to see if they could get laws changed to benefit Gabriel Popoviciu, the corrupt Romanian oligarch. In this case with Italy, they're reaching out directly to a Biden confidant who happens to be the current ambassador to Italy, Phillips, and asking him to see if he can kind of reach out to the president of Italy and reach out to the government of Italy and facilitate these transactions for Burisma. And it's like you said, they don't think anything of it. And the reason they don't think anything of it is because this is how they did business from the very, very beginning. They just thought nothing of utilizing their contacts within government, leveraging those as a way to open up and just basically get money. One other thing that we saw that's probably worth mentioning with Burisma is Hunter and his law firm were directly reaching out to members of Congress to lobby on the behalf of Burisma in 2014, and not just any members of Congress. The person that they had the most success with was none other than Chris Murphy, the senator out of, I'm blanking all of a sudden.
Connecticut.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know how I forgot that. I try to go after him almost every single day. But Chris Murphy was the guy they literally reached out to, and they got the responses that both Senator Murphy and his staff are going to actively lobby on behalf of Burisma and try and, raise positive awareness. This is at the time when everybody in Congress knew that this was a corrupt oligarch and a corrupt company.
Exactly. And that's just another example of something we knew. I mean, it was right there. I mean, we know that we've seen the papers and the emails, and there was a whole report about internal within Burisma about influencing this guy Murphy. So the media's sort of tenor this week was like, oh my goodness, how is that possible that the Bidens or Hunter Biden would seek influence with a U.S. official? Oh my God. Well, leaving aside the fact that the highest ranking U.S. official involved was the vice president, but the fact they don't talk about it all, that the fact that they make such a huge deal out of this U.S. ambassador in Italy, again, something we knew for at least 4 years, just shows you the lies, because of course it's not just that. As you just mentioned, same thing happened in Romania. Then think of Amos Hochstein. That guy was Obama's energy czar. He was like a bigwig. He was the first person that Hunter called as soon as Vadim Pojarski from Burisma on November 2nd, 2015, gave him the order to make these problems go away. The problems being the fact that the prosecutor in Ukraine was pursuing Burisma. As soon as that email, which we've discussed many times, and has been out for, well, again, since October 2020. As soon as that was out, Hunter, and again, we know this again because of the emails, October 2020, Hunter reached out, called Amos Hochstein immediately, like the first thing he called. So obviously this idea that there's a very close-knit relationship between U.S. officials and Hunter Biden's influence peddling has been known for a very long time. Blue Star is the other one. Blue Star are these people that Hunter hired to help him with all this Burisma stuff. They're Democrat fixers in D.C. They were co-organizing Biden's trip to Ukraine in December of 2015. They were on the conference calls. They were then feeding the information back to Burisma about what was going on with Biden's trip. There are so many overlaps between Biden family corruption and U.S. government officials. So this idea that now the media is going, oh my God, we had no idea that there was these overlaps, is just so infuriating.
Yeah, that's the thing that's the most offensive about this. You talked about overlaps. Boy Schiller, the law firm that Hunter was employed by, They were the same ones that were doing the reach out to Chris Murphy and other members of Congress there. But they were also the same law firm that was Chris Boy's partner of the company, who brought the Romania situation to Hunter, knowing that they needed Hunter's leverage. And said, hey, we've got an interesting situation developing. I just so happen to have a contact with the current Romanian ambassador, which of course is Gittenstein. So that's how they do these things. They find these things opportunistically, and they try and do as little work as possible. But that is the biggest single frustration right now, is what you started off talking about. The fact that the media is just sort of throwing up its hands like, oh, we're so shocked. How could this have happened? Oh my gosh, look at this. And they're the ones that assiduously ignored all of this. They did everything under their power to rebut everything that people like us were talking about. How much time? Think about just how much time they spent explaining to everybody how Biden's comments about getting the prosecutor removed weren't what they said they were, and that the prosecutor was corrupt. I mean, they basically dedicated a cottage industry to trying to prove that Victor Shokin was corrupt. So much so that they had to conflate him with the prior prosecutor, who really was corrupt. We saw all this distortion, and now to have that same media that's been lying to us this entire time, and an absolute twisting of facts, to come out and say, oh my gosh, Hunter was doing this, can you believe it? It's really hard to take. And from Ken Vogel, of all people.
And of course, this guy has a story here, because we know he knew. Of course he knew, but we know that because of emails that also came out.
Exactly.
These were FOIA emails that came out from the State Department many years ago again. In 2019, Vogel was in very close contact with another old friend of ours here, George Kent, the charge d'affaires over at the Ukrainian embassy in Kiev. And it was basically playing the role of Kent's stenographer in the U.S. media, putting Kent's message out there. I mean, some of the language there was like, we'll say whatever is comfortable, you're comfortable with. We do this off the record, and then later on, whatever you're comfortable. Just the language is just oozed this kind of sucking up thing. But obviously, he was just pitching Kent's ideas. But and Kent was totally involved, very deeply involved with the first impeachment hoax. And so given how close Vogel and Kent were, and we can prove this by email, the idea that he had no idea about what was going on is just ridiculous. And even if Kent was selling him some wrong story or whatever, he's supposedly a journalist. He's supposed to look up these things. And to be fair to Kent, he did say a few things which were then not relayed by the media. He said them privately or in emails or in other things that came out later. Do you remember the one where Kent admitted that it was that Shokin had nothing to do with the Burisma bribe?
Yeah, I mean, it's Kent's an officious little bow tie wearing bureaucrat. And as you said, he was involved in the Trump impeachment, and he was closely involved with Vogel. Now, there's an important element to that, and that's what you were just talking about. The fact that Kent knew that it was the prior prosecutor, Ukrainian prosecutor, I think it's not Yuri Lushenko, that's the follow-up.
Yarema.
Yeah, Yarema, who was actually the corrupt prosecutor. And he literally wrote an email where he described a bribe being paid to the prosecutor's office to get the investigation ended. And what happened? The investigation ended. The Ukrainian prosecutor's office refused to provide a case, a crucial case in the UK. They just said, we have no evidence. We're pursuing no case here. The UK
so
was
what
forced.
are the chances that Vogel didn't know this, given his close relationship?
That was where I was going, is the fact that here we've got Kent tied into everything. He knows factually that the current prosecutor, Shokin, is not corrupt, and he's doing exactly what he should be. He knows that the real corruption was with Yarema, the prior prosecutor. And the chances of Vogel not knowing that are zero. Precisely zero. And so that's all tied in. And yet, by the way, then here's Kent, who appears at Trump's impeachment and makes no mention of the fact that it was Yarema who was the corrupt prosecutor who received the bribes, and Shokin was actually an honest prosecutor. In the impeachment hearing, it portrays it exactly the opposite. So Kent knew all of this, but so did Vogel.
Yeah, I mean, my reading of those emails is that both knew. Well, obviously Kent knew, but Vogel knew as well what the real underlying story was. But they were just trying to spin a story, and they were both totally on the page of how to do that and how to advance, their narrative. In any case, one thing is indisputable just from looking at those emails. Kent was Vogel was extremely, it sucked up a lot to Kent in terms of let's just do it your way and whatever you want to say.
Pathetic.
So, yeah, it was absolutely pathetic. Yeah, so we have all the usual players, and now they're coming out with this stuff, which is all old. And as we said, they're doing it to cover their own tracks in terms of all the things they didn't do. What do you think is going to happen kind of going forward? Are they going to stop here? Have they kind of done their homework now, or what do you think is going to happen?
My guess is they're probably going to stop unless there's any sort of outbursts. We've had these shots fired over the bow. I don't know that it behooves them to go full bore in any way. So I guess I would kind of think there might be another follow-on story or two, but I think this has everything to do with the current election cycle and the coup that was affected on Joe Biden. That's what I think this is about. And the fact that Hunter is currently really worried, right? He fought to have this information. That's the whole reason we got this. Well, not the whole reason, but it's one of the reasons why the DOJ issued their filing a week and a half ago, admitting that Hunter was actually acting as violated FARA, was acting as a foreign agent, because Hunter didn't want all this information to come out in the trial. And the DOJ made very clear that they intend to bring some witnesses forward. This is Weiss. It's one of them whom is going to be, Eric Schwerin might be in there, but it's probably going to be the guy, now I'm suddenly blanking on his name as
Walker,
well, who had all the money run through here. I'll find it in just a moment.
Robinson Walker, right?
Yeah, yep. And what they're going to do, so it's a pushback on that. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see maybe another story or two. But again, I think it's all tied in. I think we're going to see a lot more once the Hunter's tax trial starts. Like if he really tries to fight on that, then I think we might see even more going. If Joe Biden tries to do anything, which right now it seems like he's kind of moved into acquiescence. He went from kind of silence to suddenly they issued a statement. I'm sure it wasn't issued by him, but I think he actually said something publicly. It was just the other day where he did a mumbling press conference where he suddenly started screaming at the end. And, I think Kamala was actually there and he uttered some words of support. So he's probably gotten the message. But I think those would be the telling events. Does Biden say anything or, not do what they want him to do? And does Hunter try to make any noise during his trial? I guess.
Completely agree. So the overarching background to both the Wise thing from last week as well as these new supposed disclosures, which aren't new at all this week, are simply to make sure that Biden rides off into the sunset quietly.
Right.
That's really what it's all about. And kind of just to close this off here, in terms of, I'm going to close a circle here to where we started off from. The one thing I don't expect them to ever talk about, I mean, they've given us these little, here's a bit of Ukraine, sorry, here's a bit of Romania, here's a bit of Italy. The one thing that they will never, ever talk about is the fact that when the AP, when the New York Times says that, oh my goodness, the Bidens were trying to influence, or the Hunter Biden was trying to influence U.S. officials, what they will never, ever say is the one that's been proven beyond any doubt. That U.S. official is the vice, or was the vice president. That's the part of the story they will never, ever admit.